Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Taft Welch, BDM for TEKsystems Global Services. We're glad to have you here today. There's some exciting times with ITIL4 and really in technology in general. There's been quite a bit of changes, business, ITIL, or IT service management. So this update is probably one of the bigger impacts a lot. So appreciate everyone jumping on to listen to Mike Cardinal and Donna Knapp. For those of you who don't know, Mike Cardinal is our practice manager for our enterprise service management practice at TEKsystems Global Services, and then Donna Knapp is someone he's worked with for probably 20 or so years, and she's a curriculum development manager for the ITSM Academy. So again, we're really glad to have everybody here. Please feel free to ask questions. You can hold them to the end, or you can submit them, and we will hope to answer all those questions there towards the end of the event. But again, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Taft. Appreciate that, and welcome to everyone. If you do not have your phone on mute, appreciate that. If you could do that, I do believe everybody's coming in on mute. But really honored today to be in front of you and to have a very good friend and industry luminary with me, Donna Knapp. So if you would say hi, Donna.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So today we want to talk a little bit about ITIL and what's been happening with it. Many of you are on a service management journey and have been hearing about this new thing called ITIL4 that's arrived. So we want to kind of answer some questions for you, including, what's new, what's happening, why is that important, what does it make a difference for us? How do you take ITIL4 and use it to go beyond just IT, because that's one of the sort of key things that ITIL4 is allowing us to do, is move beyond IT. What are sort of the inner workings of ITIL4, and how does it incorporate some things like Lean and DevOps and Agile and OCM and some other kind of things? A key important thing for many of you is, how do I take ITIL4 and use it from an operational standpoint? And to that point, how am I going to shift that journey from what I'm doing today maybe into using ITIL4 as the guiding principles? And then finally, we're going to wrap up talking about how you can learn more and how do you get perhaps the official certifications on that. So let's start this journey. So as many of you know, there's this new thing called ITIL4 that's available. And ITIL4 is the latest incarnation in a long history of best practices, really going back to the early 1980s and some of the earliest best practice frameworks that ultimately became ITIL. It's gone through all of its various iterations, and now we are on sort of the fourth generation of ITIL. And the focus here is going to be on value. Now, for many of you who've been doing ITIL as long as Donna and myself, you'll recognize that this concept of value really has been present throughout the iterations. It just hasn't necessarily perhaps been the real focus of the ITIL best practices. But with ITIL4, there is now really a shift in that direction. And so what you're going to start to see in ITIL4 is movement, in a sense, away from what we know today as the life cycle strategy down through CSI into what is now going to be known as the service value system. And the service value system, top left-hand diagram, really talks in a broader, more conceptual way about what an organization needs to do to move from some need or opportunity or demand into providing value. Now, like I said, it's always been there within the ITIL practices, but the emphasis may not have been there as strong. So the new concepts around this value chain really end up replacing in some way the service lifecycle that many of you are familiar with. It doesn't mean that it's not still there, it's just sort of a new take on that. And with that, then there are a couple other concepts that are coming along, including the service value chain, that's the top right-hand diagram, which really allows you to build various value streams and various value chains dependent on what is happening in your organization. Now, both of those concepts then are really factored around the bottom diagram, which is various domains or dimensions that are involved. And some of you will notice that this is very much like the old 4 Ps of strategy and the 4 Ps of design out of version 3. And the idea that people and technology and partners and suppliers and processes and value streams are all very important. So together, all of this is now going to be the real focus of ITIL4. So Donna, why should somebody care about this? Why should someone start looking at some of this value concept and value chain activity?
So a big part of what we have to think about is what has happened since ITIL version 3, what many of us know as ITIL 2011 was introduced, and now ITIL 4. If you think about the past 10 years, and V3 was originally introduced in 2018, they refined it a little bit and then published it as 2011. What have we seen? We've seen organizations undergoing massive digital transformations. We have seen organizations come to really understand the importance of customer experience and making sure that we don't just talk about value, that we understand what our customers value. And we also have learned that we have to figure out how to strike a balance between moving fast, and that's a lot of what the Agile initiative has brought in. That's a lot of what DevOps has brought in for those of you who are familiar with those concepts. And that need to ensure stability, which is historically where IT service management has lived. You know, if you look at processes like change management and incident management, right, we're always looking to figure out how we can either minimize impact to normal service operations or very, very quickly restore service if something goes wrong. The reality is we have to strike a balance between stability and agility in order to be successful in organizations today. And that means we have to take everything up a level, that we can have the development part of our organization introducing agile practices and the ops side of our house introducing IT service management and having maybe very rigorous, perhaps overly rigorous IT service management processes in place. That's a core chronic conflict that, you know, we have to break down. So what the service value system does is take it up to the organizational level. Mike talked about elevating ITIL to the organizational level. The service value system, and I think of it as kind of a set of guardrails that you can put in place, a set of principles that you can put in place, understanding the need for governance. You know, if you're a regulated organization or if you have legal requirements that you have to address. This service value chain, which is really at the heart of the service value system, is the key activities that we need to put in place within our organization in order to go from demand through to the delivery of value to our customers. And then the practices and the need for continual improvement within our organization. So let's take everything up a level. Let's start looking at things across functional areas within our organization. Let's look across processes. Even today, we have to look across organizations. Very few companies today don't use third-party service providers in some way, shape, or form. So this service value system has to look at how do we work when we have, you know, all of these different functional areas and all these different organizations that have to collaborate in order for us to be successful.
All right, great, thanks. So how do we take service management that Donna and I just talked about and kind of move it beyond IT? Because that's one of the things that Donna mentioned, right? We're escalating this up above operations and into a bigger and more holistic organizational concept. So one of the things that I've always talked about when talking about ITIL is this idea of business IT alignment. And imagine that you're in sort of a row with the business. And business IT alignment means that you're on the sort of same page in what you're looking at, but you may not be working as closely with the business as you should, right? So you're in the same boat. Let's all row in the same direction. And the reality is, it's no longer an us versus them. It's really just us. So you want to start shifting from a business IT alignment to a business IT integration. The business doesn't function without IT. IT doesn't exist without the business. So we're in this together. And that's what ITIL4 is really trying to get people to understand, and really in many ways has always been trying to get organizations to understand, that you've got to intertwine IT and the business together. You can't sort of operate in a vacuum, as it were. And so you've got to really go for this idea of adopting and adapting the principles that are laid out not only in ITIL4, but in a number of best practices frameworks. So the idea of lean and DevOps and Agile, which many of you are familiar with. Certified Process Design Engineer is, again, a lean-like process-driven engineering principle. TOGAF, the architecture framework, sprints and Kanban and Six Sigma and all of the others. So the idea is not to be just an ITIL shop. It's to take all of the parts and pieces and the best practices that work for an organization and form sort of your own approach based on those best practices. And then again, at the heart of all of this is this concept of the service. So moving away from a technological focus into a service focus. And notice the change in definition here for ITIL4. The definition changes to value co-creation. Again, the idea that there are many partners, many organizations involved here. So Donna, what are your thoughts on sort of moving things again up to that higher level?
Well, one of the things that really excites me about ITIL4 is that all of these initiatives have been going on for a lot of years now. And I mentioned this, organizations have been introducing Agile and DevOps and Lean. But we haven't seen organizations that really understood that these all work together. They all have a role to play within your organization. They all bring a set of principles, a way of thinking, a way of working. And where you see the highest performing organizations is when they bring all of these pieces together. So it's an and statement, not an or statement. And we hear people say this, don't we, Mike? People say, should we do ITIL or DevOps? Should we do Agile or DevOps? And really, it should be an and statement. The highest performing organizations are doing Agile and Lean and ITIL and DevOps, right? Name any of these other methods or frameworks. You draw from any best practices available. Why wouldn't you draw from any best practice that's available to help you achieve higher levels of performance within your organization? So I think IT's starting to wrap their head around that it is an and statement and not an or statement.
Yeah, both and, not either or. Very good.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about some of those other concepts and frameworks that are now really complementary and supplementary and in some ways very embedded in ITIL4. So this is not by any means all of the frameworks as we just listed that are involved in ITIL4, but these are some of the principal ones that organizations have been heading towards and using. So this ages-old concept of lean is finally being recognized by IT and the business as not just being a manufacturing concept, but really working in many ways for a whole organization. The idea of DevOps, so bringing together the development folks and the operational folks in line with things like security and business and other concerns. And then the principles of Agile and its various formats, so that's Scrum or Kanban or other types of methodologies, Spotify. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these in turn and what they sort of add to ITIL4. So the first is this idea of lean, and if you're familiar with lean, lean goes back many, many years, probably close to 100 years now in its basic concepts. And the idea is to move an organization in a value stream, and this is where a lot of the value stream idea comes from, is this concept of lean. So looking at identifying who is your customer, what is the value that you're providing to them, but more importantly, the value you're providing with them, that co-creation idea. Then sitting down with those customers and sitting down with the business and identifying what is the stream, what is the flow of things that you're looking to do, knowing what you do, why you do it, how you do it, and then eliminating non-value add steps. So there's really sort of these three concepts involved here. So there's the value add steps that you do that are the core part of your value stream. There are the supplementary and underlying principles that support the value stream. And then there's non-value adding stuff, which is really waste. And so how do you go through and eliminate some of that waste? But you don't want to have ideas or steps sort of disconnected. You want them to flow smoothly, effectively, efficiently, and to really respond to the needs of the customer. If you remember, there was an old movie with Robin Williams called Robots, a cartoon, and the principal idea in there is see a need, fill a need. So don't create things just to create them. See that they create that need, and then pursue perfection. This doesn't mean you have to achieve perfection. You really just need to have a target of 0 defects, or eliminating as much waste as possible, and then driving that back through. So Donna, I know you've just gone through a value stream mapping course. What are some ideas or concepts that you might hit upon here for people?
So, Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to mention, first of all, that these are not new concepts. You know, lean as an approach, as a set of practices, has been around since the 1900s. And IT is really late to this party. You know, these concepts aren't new. And IT is late to the party for a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons is because our work is not as visible. If you think about lean originally in the manufacturing environment, you could actually see parts going down an assembly line. Well, in an IT organization, we've only recently started to understand the need to make work visible, the need to be able to have a pipeline and to be able to see a piece of code making its way through the pipeline, running a series of tests to ensure that that code is accurate and complete and satisfies all of your organization's regulatory controls, and try to make that flow as much as you possibly can. So kind of a big thing we have to do in IT is make work visible, first of all. Once we've made it visible, and let's make it visible at this value stream level, at this higher level. Let's get up over functional areas. So let's talk about, like Mike said, development and security and testing and operations and our business counterparts. That's what a value stream is all about, right? It's the flow of work across functional areas or across processes. So let's make those steps visible, and then let's make them flow. Let's eliminate as much waste as we possibly can, as many handoffs as we possibly can, as many approvals as we possibly can, in order to make work flow. So it really requires that IT organizations really think a lot more about being transparent, about making their work visible, and also I think something, and Mike, maybe I think you'll agree with me, for some reason in IT organizations we tend to tolerate waste. If you think about concepts like technical debt, and even if you think about a lot of the handoffs that we have, how much time work sits in queues very often, how many of you all that are attending today have a situation where work comes to you, maybe a ticket comes to you, and it doesn't have all the information that you need, but rather than give that feedback to the person who sent the ticket to you and say, hey, going forward, can you please correct this? you just tolerate it, right? You go ahead and fill in the fields, or you use, the inaccurate information you got, and then possibly pass incorrect information downstream to the next person in line from you. So I think, does that make sense, Mike? That I think in IT organizations, we have to learn to be intolerant of this waste and be intolerant when there are constraints and when there are bottlenecks, and really wrap our heads around this idea of flow.
Yeah, and we're going to actually see a quote to that point later on in the presentation that I think everybody will enjoy. So another principle that has really come to the forefront over the last few years is this concept of DevOps. Really, it's what's known as a portmanteau of development and operations, and the idea is to work together. And the concepts here are based in something called the 3 ways. The first way is to have that bigger picture of systems thinking. Sort of what Donna was talking about, what I was talking about, is the whole flow. Notice that word flow. That's a really key part of all of the value idea of ITIL4, is to have things work very seamlessly, very consistently across functional areas, across time, across people. So the idea of seeing the bigger picture of operations, of development, as opposed to seeing things isolated in a vacuum. Then learning from your mistakes, learning from the things that you do, known as double loop learning. So the idea here is that you feed back the information about what went well and what could be improved to then increase the better systems thinking, to make the flow work even better. And then the third way is to have that culture of continual learning and experimentation. Mistakes are not bad. Mistakes are points for learning, and I've always said in ITIL, there aren't problems in ITIL. There aren't issues or room for blame. There's only room for identifying something that's not working well and improving it. So it's really learning to become a learning organization. How do you take what you're doing and improve upon it? So Donna, I know these sound in many ways very sort of high and conceptual, but how does someone sort of take these principles and make them real?
So part of the idea of the first way, or systems thinking, we just talked about, that getting up to the value stream level, looking at your entire system and working very, very holistically across your organization to understand the flow of work. It's really important to understand that good people could be working really, really hard on improvement projects. But if your improvement project is only improving your one little functional area, in Lean it's referred to as local optimization, you need to understand that you're not necessarily going to move the dial in terms of greater business benefit. In those organizations where we see that understanding of value streams and that understanding of, again, getting up to that higher systems level thinking, they are much, much more successful. And I think also today, we all appreciate the idea of feedback. We just have to get better at passing along. We have to kind of learn to pass along constructive feedback. We have to pass that feedback along in a timely manner. And we also have to really, really listen to our customers. In this day and age of social media, think how quickly, right, one kind of mistake even can really damage the reputation of an organization if it makes its way out onto Twitter. So really listening and having those really fast feedback loops enables us then to continuously improve. And I think experimentation is so important. I did a training class one time for an organization, and they had signs on the walls of their company that said failure is not an option. And at the time, I was going in to teach a DevOps class, and I thought, oh, gosh, this is going to be a little bit of a hard sell, because they really had a hard time understanding that if you're experimenting, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail a lot. But the idea is that that's okay as long as you're learning. So I think some of this is just shifting the way we think about how we interact with each other and what we focus on within our organizations. And we're going to talk about the guiding principles. The guiding principles really, really can help with that. Principles-based thinking. You know, if and Mike, I think you'll agree with me on this. If y'all can take nothing away from this presentation today, it's that idea of principles-based thinking, because I think historically what organizations have done is taken ITIL and turned it into, a set of rules that were cast in concrete. We had to follow them to the letter of the law. Really, what we want to do is set up a way of thinking, and then shift the way people think, right, based on those principles. If you can shift the way people think, you can shift the way people work and interact with each other.
Yeah, it's all about the ABCs, right? Attitude, behavior, and culture, and that's the sort of components of thinking.
Exactly.
So one of the things that can lead from that then is this concept of Agile. And I think one of the things over time that people make a mistake with Agile is they focus on Agile as in big A Agile, this methodology and set of ceremonies and concrete structures like Donna was talking about, as opposed to the little a Agile, that is being fast and flexible and learning from your mistakes, and why in some ways Agile and DevOps are a perfect match together. So one of the things that is really important that Donna mentioned out of Agile is this idea of failing fast, right? Is getting to what's happening, getting on top of it, and making some changes, even if that means some mistakes along the way that you're learning from. Just wanted to point out a few of the concepts that are being pulled from Agile into ITIL4. So one is this concept of design with the user. Too often design happens by going into a small dark room and there's no input from the outside, and that really needs to start happening. You need to have the business alongside of you as you do things. Data driven. Know that difference between a fact and an opinion. So facts and data and information and knowledge and wisdom, the DIKW idea from ITIL, still kind of in place there, making that decision based on the data that's in front of you. Collaboration, very important, being open-minded, working with others within the organization to accept that maybe they have some good ideas and we can implement those. And then something that I've pulled from my own children, this idea of reduce, reuse, recycle. So learn what you can reuse from the past. Maybe it has to change, maybe it was before its time, but we can kind of implement some of those ideas to help us drive forward. And I know, Donna, you have been a leader in taking the Agile principles just out of sort of the development space and into the ITSM space. So again, what are your thoughts or some ideas about how we can incorporate some of these Agile principles into ITSM?
So I became a Scrum Master about, it's probably been, 8 or 9 years ago now. And it really shifted the way I thought, because up until then, I could be a bit of a perfectionist. And, think about that in the context of process design and improvement. We want to design a process and we want to account for every possible condition that could ever occur. And we want to have very, very clear policies so that everybody, knows how to do it. And that all sounds great, but it takes a really, really long time. And so one of the key things I walked away from when I became a Scrum Master is the concept of minimum viable product. And we in Agile Service Management adapt that to minimum viable process of really chunking up your work, figuring out what's the minimum amount of work that we need to do right now in order to get feedback. And that's the key, right? The reason you're chunking up that work is so you can get fast feedback. Yeah, it works. No, it doesn't work. It would be nice if we had. And then you've got some real solid facts that you can use in order to improve what you're doing. So I think for each and every one of us, that's a practice and a way of thinking that will really serve you well in today's workforce. We never go too far downfield, and here's where we're seeing organizations starting to move away from traditional waterfall, where the idea is you try to define all your requirements up front. You can't possibly do that. Sometimes you need people just to see something, to be able to, put something in front of them and let them say yes, no. Again, would be nice if. And actually then make improvements in collaboration with your customers. So I think it's just a good way of approaching anything you do in your life, right? Taking this iterative, incremental approach to doing things.
So let's talk about
Cardinal and Donna. There are a couple questions coming through, and I just wanted to remind everybody that just to continue with your questions, and we'll make sure to hit them here towards the end.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit then about how we take some of this back into sort of the operational realm. And the idea here with ITIL4 is not that you remove yourself from the operational world, but you take it from a different perspective, right? Rather than inside out, you're going to be looking at it in a sense from the outside in. So many of you are familiar with the fact that ITIL has had these things called processes for so long. So one of the big changes with ITIL4 is a movement away from the concept of a process to the concept of a practice. And the idea is to incorporate much of what we talked about into the steps and flow that already exist. And what ITIL4 has done is taken many of the existing practices and divided them into 3 basic areas where you can use them, and then added a number of others. So we've had before this, number 20-something processes. This is now going to drive us into 34 practices. And so I want to hand over to Donna for a few minutes to kind of talk about how these are laid out and some of the new things that we can expect. So Donna, if you could just kind of cover what these practices are, what's new, what we should be concerned about.
Absolutely. And I just want to make the point that when you all have a chance to go back and look at your presentation again, if you look at the 4 dimensions, the concept of process isn't going away. So if you look, there is an aspect of one of the 4 dimensions is in fact value streams and processes. The reason why there's this move to talking about practices is because it's a greater concept. It's the idea of understanding that in each of these practices, we have to build not only capability of the process itself, but, and y'all know this, right? People, processes, technology. We have to think about all of those aspects, not just the process component of it. So the categories are really nothing more than to illustrate the fact that ITIL has drawn from many different industries. It's not only invented in IT. So if you think about just general management practices, concepts like organizational change management and workforce and talent management, these aren't unique to IT. These are concepts that are used throughout the organization across many, many different types of industries. So what you see in terms of new practices is bringing in some of those practices like architecture management that we've not necessarily talked about historically in ITIL, and also again that some of those broader concepts like organizational change management and workforce and talent management that are so important within our organizations. Another thing that I want to mention kind of while we're on this slide is that historically in ITIL, we talked about 4 functions, right? The service desk, IT management, operations management. Those functions are now gone, and the functions have been actually absorbed into the practices. So that you see now practices, technical practices, for example, like deployment management and infrastructure management. This is where the information and the need for that capability has gone. It's moved into this area of technical management. And notice also that we've introduced a practice for software development and management. Historically, ITIL shied away from the development part of the organization intentionally, right? And the thinking was that there are other, frameworks and methodologies, whether it's Prince2 or whether it's PMI, there are other bodies of knowledge that serve that community very, very well. But unfortunately, what happened by not addressing that community is we really created a little bit of a chasm between dev and ops. So I think that's a tremendous void that's been filled in ITIL4. You'll also notice, of course, that many of these practices are, in fact, what we historically referred to as processes. So here's where it's really important to understand that your investment in ITIL is not for naught. An incident is still an incident. A problem is still a problem, right? Those practices have simply been elevated to, again, emphasize the need to think about people, process, and technology. You've seen a few changes. So an example that seems to always get everybody's attention, and being a former change manager at one point in my career, I sort of understand why, is the change from change management to change control. And the only reason that they made that distinction is to be able to make it clear what we were talking about in the context of organizational change management, the people aspect of making changes, and change control being controlling changes to technology. So there's been the addition of some new practices. We're seeing some of the existing practices evolving and being refined. But much of the core guidance, right, if you actually look and go through the list of compare ITIL3 processes to ITIL4 practices, the core guidance remains intact and is simply evolving. Another thing that's really interesting is that Axelos, who owns the ITIL framework, is introducing a new subscription service called My ITIL. And the details of these practices are actually going to live in My ITIL. So while there will be core publications, much of the guidance for ITIL is going to live online. Now, why is that important? Because it allows it to evolve much more quickly. With a publication, there's a publication life cycle, right? And there's a cost associated with publishing those books and us all having to go out and buy new books. So it's really going to be great to see that as IT evolves and as these practices evolve, we're going to be able to get essentially real-time updates in terms of what's emerging in the industry by going out to My ITIL and looking at the details of these practices.
So Donna, behind these practices is really then a set of principles, right? And what ITIL4 really starts to do is to bring those principles again to the fore. Many people might be familiar with some of these out of the practitioner class that existed. Give us a little bit of your wisdom on the reason why we have these principles.
So the guiding, part of the mission of ITIL4, part of the key objective in introducing this update was to better align ITIL with other frameworks like Agile and Lean and DevOps. And I really very much believe that it's in the guiding principles that you see that. If you look at focus on value, for example, that's very much a Lean concept. If you look at the 5 principles of Lean thinking, it starts with understand value from the perspective of your customer. Start where you are is very firmly entrenched in continuous improvement. If you look at the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act, it starts with where you are, right? Understand where you are and then plan how, what improvements you need to make and how you need to make those improvements. Progress iteratively with feedback is very much an Agile concept. And that idea of feedback is very much a DevOps concept. If you think back, the second way is really about creating that fast feedback from right to left. Collaborate. If you look at the definition of DevOps, it's really, by definition, a movement that aims to improve communication and collaboration across the IT value chain. So collaboration is very much drawn from DevOps. Promote visibility is very much a Lean concept. Any of you that are using Kanban boards, for example, right? That's what Kanban boards are all about. It's promoting visibility. And also one of the pillars of Agile is transparency. Think and work holistically, systems thinking, very much a lean concept, and DevOps roots are in lean, so you see it very much in DevOps as well. Keep it simple and practical. I don't know, Mike. That's just like a good life skill, isn't it?
Yep.
It's like that's just like let's just draw that from life. But certainly lean. The more I learn about lean, the more I understand that lean's focus always is on keeping it simple, and finding the fewest possible steps that we can use in order to deliver value. And then DevOps, and a lot of people think this is what DevOps is all about, but it's about a lot more. But optimize and automate, and we talk about this a lot in CPD. The idea that if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster, right? So optimize first, right? Understand your value streams, understand your processes, eliminate that non-value add work, and then make the remaining steps flow, and then and only then can we in fact automate. So it's really in the guiding principles. I very much believe that you see ITIL embracing what is modern IT, right? The reality that it's Agile and Lean and DevOps and ITIL. It's not, let's move away from there being a chronic conflict between those different ways of working.
Yeah, and to me, the guiding principles sort of get embodied in a phrase that many people know. I've practiced for so long. No tools before the rules, right? So the idea is, get all of your value and your iterations and your collaboration, get all that in place first, then that'll tell you what's going to make the most sense to automate. So tool as an enabler. So ITIL continues to reinforce that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So how do we go about and kind of shift your journey? What do you guys need to do now that ITIL4 is available? Well, as Donna has mentioned, as I've mentioned, it's really about thinking. So the idea is to shift how you think, how you behave, what your attitude is, the culture of your organization, those ABCs, and to kind of look at it as a continuation of the journey that you're already on, right? So take that road less traveled, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some good principles behind that. So start slow, look towards ITIL4, what it can tell you. Don't try to abandon what you've done. Don't give up the past. Don't indict the past, but keep working forward with that. And then start to learn, right? So start sending some of your key role holders, process owners or practice owners, management, key individuals in your organization to ITIL4 Foundation. That is available. Increase the pace of education over time, and then ultimately take advantage of the managing professional bridge if you have your ITIL expert or you've already been on an ITIL education journey. And so I want to hand over again to Donna to talk a little bit about some of that down the road. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, another way for you to sort of learn a little bit more about ITIL is to think about the past. So I'm a former historian. I taught history prior to coming into the world of ITIL. And one of my all-time favorite folks is William Edwards Deming. And as I said, here's a quote from Deming that talks about the mistakes that Donna was talking about. So we have learned to live in a world of mistakes and defective products as if they were necessary to life. It's time to adopt a new philosophy in America. And in many ways, ITIL is that new philosophy. So I know this gentleman is one of your favorites, Donna, but what do you like about him? So what do you like about the man?
And I said this to you the other day, Mike. Isn't it fascinating that Deming probably said this in what, like the 1980s or something?
Yep.
Right? For sure, 20, 30 years ago, we could find the attribution of this quote. I mean, he really, I think he is just the kind of such a good teacher in terms of helping us to understand the importance of continuous improvement, but incremental continuous improvement. I mean, he's credited with Plan, Do, Check, Act, and he always emphasized the idea of getting a little bit better every day and always looking for those little opportunities to improve. It doesn't have to be, we all get overwhelmed when we have these big, massive initiatives and the expectations for the initiative are so high. Let's just every day try to get a little bit better.
Yeah, and Deming was talking about some of these concepts as early as the 1920s, so almost 100 years ago. And you'll notice a hashtag, Donna said Deming. So one of the little internal games that we like to play is to have Donna say Deming in every presentation that she does. So we've accomplished that goal. So you can tweet out that Donna said Deming in this presentation. And Donna and I are big fans of Deming, if you can't tell that. But it's not just Deming, right? There's the My ITIL, which is going to have the prescription kind of stuff around the practices. I shouldn't say prescription, but the details behind that.
The details,
right? There's organizations like DevOps Institute that allow you to gain more knowledge about how DevOps can be used, not just in a development sense, an operational sense, but in an ITSM sense. And then, as I said, being a historian, always going back to the work of the masters. So looking at what people like Deming, Duran, Crosby, and Michael Porter all wrote about quality, lean, and value. Looking at the foundations of systems thinking. If you've not become familiar with Gene Kim and his works, the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook, and earlier works like Visible Ops, all great stuff. There's also the Agile Manifesto, and then a book by a gentleman named Mike Orzen called Lean IT. Great stuff. So don't just keep your thinking to ITIL4. Look beyond ITIL4, and that's a big concept in all of service management is, as we said, pulling from these various frameworks. So,
yeah,
and I think
Cardinal
there's sometimes.
And Donna, sorry, that answers a question too. Sorry to jump into the questions, but that was one of them. Was other than the Phoenix Project, what reading or books would you recommend? So this is answering someone's question.
Yeah.
We can get an even bigger list if people are interested, but I just thought we'd kind of touch upon some of the greats here.
Right.
Awesome.
And, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that, some of these books are 50 years old, some of these books are 2 years old, but just because something's been around for a while doesn't mean the concepts aren't still really sound and really useful when applied to the challenges that we're facing today. I mean, the IT industry is facing this period of time where we've got to learn to innovate, we've got to learn to we've got to learn to strike that balance between innovation and stability and high quality. That's a problem that the auto manufacturers solved, 100 years ago. So we can learn from these masters, and we can apply the way they think to the modern world very, very successfully.
So as promised, one of the things that we do want to talk about, and I know time is precious for this hour, but wanted to have Donna talk a little bit about how to get more information certification. And I'm asking Donna to do this because she has been intimately involved with this and has really kind of driven some of the certifications. Donna, if you'd just take a minute or two and kind of talk about the schema, that'd be appreciated.
Yes. So I'm going to try to do this relatively quickly. And I want to start out by giving a little bit of the method to the madness. So I want to mention, first of all, that these two categories, ITIL Managing Professional and ITIL Strategic Leader, are designations. In other words, they're not classes. So the classes themselves kind of live underneath the designation. So in order to become a managing professional, for example, you have to take these 4 classes, and then you will be designated an ITIL managing professional. If you take these 2 classes, you will be designated an ITIL strategic leader, right? So those up to ITIL managing professional, strategic leader are designations versus certifications. As with anything, we start at the foundation level, which are the key concepts and the vocabulary. I want to mention that there is no bridge for ITIL4 Foundation. So those of you who already hold an ITIL 3 certification, you might be thinking to yourself, how do I bridge over? You don't bridge over at the foundation level. And one of the reasons you don't bridge over at the foundation level is because, first of all, there's a lot of new content that's being introduced at the foundation level. But even the existing content that's being carried over, so concepts like service and service management and incident and problem, the changes to those concepts are subtle enough and yet important enough that it really warrants you kind of rethinking how you look at those terms and how you look at those particular concepts. So there is no bridge at the foundation level. If you want ITIL 4 foundation, you kind of go in and you take the class. Where there is a bridging opportunity is at this managing professional level. So if you are an ITIL expert, number one, or if you hold 17 credits in the ITIL 3 qualification scheme, and y'all know who you are, then you can take this one class. And what it means is you don't have to take ITIL 4 Foundation, and you don't have to take any of these 4 managing professional classes. And you will be granted the designation ITIL Managing Professional. You won't get Strategic Leader, but you'll get Managing Professional. So the bridging opportunity is at the higher level for those people who hold a higher number of credits or who are the ITIL expert. The one other thing I want to mention is, if you notice, there is what's called a universal class, and that is this ITIL strategist class. And this is the continuous improvement, look at the name of it, direct, plan, and improve, right? So direct speaks to the governance aspect of the service value system, those principles, and that idea of iterative planning and improvement. And this class, because it's a universal class, it lives in both streams. So you take it once, right, and then you get it, right? So you don't have to take it again. If you want to go for both of these designations, you don't have to take it again as you navigate your way through both of those streams. So for those of you who are, in fact, an ITIL expert, for example, or if you've got those 17 credits, what you would be able to do is take Managing Professional, yes, that gets you the Managing Professional designation, take ITIL Leader, right, because you've already gotten Strategist as part of bridging over. Take this one more class, and then you will also get the designation of ITIL Strategic Leader. So, and then ITIL Master. And ITIL Master is going to be a demonstration of practical application. That program has existed. We do expect them to evolve it a little bit with ITIL 4. But as it exists today, you have to undertake a project and you have to demonstrate that you can, in fact, apply your ITIL concepts. So, Mike, do you think all that makes sense? Did I leave any questions, do you think, on the table for that?
Oh, I'm sure you did. But what I do want to do is kind of indicate to people that the at a minimum right now, the ITIL Foundation class is available through TEKsystems. And you can reach out to Taft, or you can reach out to your business development manager and work with them about getting those classes down the road with Donna's help. She's actually working on some of these higher level classes. The Transition Bridge and some of the other classes will be available down the road. But for now, ITIL 4 is available. We can provide you with that class. So I'm sure there's lots of questions. I do want to let people know we have about 5 minutes left in the original time, but Donna and I are willing to stay on and answer the questions. And then what we'll do is not only send out the record or send out the presentation, but we'll also then provide answers to any of the questions in a written format if you need to drop. So Taft, I'm going to kind of hand it back over to you and let you kind of feed us some of these questions.
No, thanks a lot. You guys did a great job. So got a couple questions. First one, and you've answered a couple as you've gone along. This one says, Have you taken the ITIL4 certification test yet? If so, how does it compare to version 3?
Donna, you want to answer that? You want me to answer that? Because I think we have a
Well,
little bit
we
different
both have.
Yeah, we both have, yes.
We both have. I think that I would say, generally speaking, that it's pretty straightforward, pleasantly so. You know, ITIL Foundation has historically been a little bit, we describe it, Mike, as like getting blasted from a fire hose, right? It just covers a massive amount of information and tons of concepts. And ITIL4 is actually a little bit lighter. There's a little bit more breathing room in the course, so you have a little bit greater ability to absorb, right, what you're learning. And then the exam itself is a little more straightforward, generally speaking. There are a couple of places where they go down into the weeds. You know, the questions are super nuanced, but really it's a relatively small number of questions, and we've gained some insight into what those are. So I have found it to be pretty straightforward. And I'm the curriculum development manager for ITSM Academy, which means I develop and maintain our course materials, and we've got 100% pass so far on the exam. So far so good. I should not say those kind of things out loud, should I?
Yeah, don't want to jinx yourself.
Right? I know. What was I thinking?
Yeah. All right.
What about and I think you answered this one. What about the transition from ITIL Expert V3 to 4?
Yeah, so that's really
I think
it's this managing professional bridge class that Donna talked about, right?
Yep.
And so yeah, you can contact through Taft or direct to myself about how we get that to you later in the year. So that'll come out later in 2019. And
what we do know about it is it's going to be a 5-day class, right? So it's going to be pretty comprehensive, right? Because you're covering a lot of ground there. But yeah, we're expecting fourth quarter. We'll see managing professional transition.
Got another one. Interesting question. What size of an organization is too small for ITIL4?
I would say there is no organization too small.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, a good friend of Donna and I, a guy named Andy Atencio, is the CTO of the village of Greenwood Village, Colorado, south of Denver. He has a total of 4 people working for him, and he has an exemplary effort around ITIL and has for many, many years. So it's nothing's too small to apply the guiding principles, right? You can apply those principles to yourself as an individual. You can apply them to the biggest organizations. It's all around how much effort and time you want to spend. And I don't know, Donna, if you had other thoughts.
I 1,000% agree, and I think, in fact, because what ITIL4 challenges organizations to do is keep it simple and practical, it's even more applicable to smaller organizations. You know, there's nothing in there that's not applicable to a small organization. I think really the bigger challenge is for the great big organizations who have these big behemoth processes and these highly complex systems in place, right, for them to back off and make their complex environments simpler is a greater challenge than small organizations embracing the guiding principles, for example.
I agree.
How do I get my business to understand the value of ITIL and DevOps?
So one of the ways that I've seen is to get those business people to take the ITIL class, right? At least the foundation. And I think with ITIL4, the great thing I like about ITIL4 is this class is in many ways geared towards people who are already in those business thinking kind of worlds, right? So I think it's a great sort of umbrella or bridging class to bring IT and business together to move from the alignment to the integration. So I think that's a starting point is start bringing in and having people attend the ITIL4 classes, but then also work with the business to understand what their needs are, to just sort of follow the principles of ITIL. That's what I've seen.
And what I would add to that is, and this is going to sound a little, I don't know, controversial, but stop talking about ITIL and start talking about service management, right? Because that's what ITIL is about. ITIL is a framework that enables you to introduce service management into your organization. So talk about services. Talk about the services that your company provides. Talk about those, as Mike just said, the business goals that you have relative to those services. How can you be more competitive in your marketplace? How can you meet the goals of your organization? How can you improve the quality of your services? So talk about services, talk about value, talk about service management as a greater concept. ITIL is just a framework that provides guiding principles that help you improve the quality of your services. So talk about service management.
This is great. When you purchase an ITSM tool like ServiceNow, is out of the box sufficient?
Yeah, talk about a controversial question. So many people have heard me say this. The thing about ServiceNow, and any tool, this was true with HP, with BMC, is the box, the problem is the box is really empty, right? So there is a lot of work that needs to be done with any tool to have it work for you. And the key is to get the tool to enable your capabilities and your desires as opposed to you becoming sort of working for the tool. And having been through recent ServiceNow certifications, it is completely possible. I think what scares people is it takes a lot more work than you realize. So I always like to say, and Donna's heard me say this before, anything you approach that's going to involve people is going to take you 3 times as long as you think it's going to. There is no quick fix with a tool. As Donna said, you buy a tool and you don't have your rules or your processes or practices in place, you're just going to do broken stuff faster. And it's no different with ServiceNow than it has been with any tool. So the key is to approach ServiceNow and approach any tool that you're going to use by thinking about what is the purpose of it, why are you using, what are you hoping to get from it, and the value you're trying to drive in an organization, and let that then drive what the tool needs to do for you. So I guess that's the long way to say that no, out of the box is really not sufficient to do good service management.
Right. It's really just the how. You know, if you think back of that old like who, what, when, where, why, how, the tool is just the how, right? So before you introduce that tool, you have to be thinking about who's going to do this work. Why are we even doing this work? What is the work that needs to be done? Where are we going to do this work? You have to answer all those questions from an organizational perspective and from a process design and improvement perspective. You have to make those decisions. The vendor can't make those decisions for you. The tool can't make those decisions for you. You have to make those decisions, and then the tool just then reinforces the how of it, the workflow of it once you've made all of those decisions.
That's great. That's it on the questions. I think we've got 10. I haven't seen any more come through, but those were really good questions, and I appreciate you all elaborating on those.
Thanks, everybody.
But yeah, no, this has been really great, and thanks for everybody's help putting this together. Thank you, Donna and Cardinal, for your support on this. And again, feel free to reach out to me or any of your sales team or BDM if you have any questions around service management, DevOps, or all of the above. So again, unless Donna and Cardinal, unless you have anything else, I think it's been a pretty productive hour.